this morning's session. Obviously, it's been a year of headaches. Probably the biggest one we've had in a long time, of course, is transportation. And that's going to be the discussion today. ILMA is thankful to Chevron Oronite for sponsoring this. Not only this session, but the whole year of the LubeTrends town halls. Thank you very much for that. Now I'd like to introduce a good friend of mine, Mike DeBattista with Chevron Oronite. Introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Mike. It's really good to actually see people face to face for the first time in roughly a year and a half. So I'm Mike DeBattista, the manager of North America sales for Chevron Oronite. I'd like to thank ILMA for the opportunity to be here today. We value and appreciate our involvement with both ILMA and with LubeTrends. Our involvement has allowed us to stay close to ILMA, ILMA members, and the issues that the industry faces these days. So with that, ILMA LubeTrends Live Town Hall is your opportunity to get an update on some important issues and also to weigh in with your questions and share your insights. So after the panelists give their updates, you are welcome to ask questions and offer comments. We're pleased to have two industry experts in transportation with us this morning. We have Bob Costello, who is the Chief Economist and Senior Vice President of the International Trade Policy and Cross-Border Operations for the American Trucking Associations. He manages all of ATA's trucking economic information and conducts economic analyses and of proposed regulations affecting the trucking industry. He also works on issues related to the USMCA, tariffs, customs, and immigration. He was also appointed by the Secretary of Commerce to serve on the Advisory Committee on Supply Chain Competitiveness. We also have with us Jim Mancini, who is the Vice President of North America Surface Transportation with C.H. Robinson, where he has held many roles over his 20-year career. He is an expert in renewables and oversees the company's services and technology for the energy sector. Bob and Jim will each begin the discussion with some background information. Then session moderator and ILMA's Director of Communications, Caitlin Jacobs, will kick off the discussion. So with that, let's please welcome our panelists.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Bob Costello with ATA, and I was a little surprised to learn you're having some issues with transportation and drivers. That's new to me. I don't know. No, we really haven't seen a time like this. We've had challenges in the past, no doubt, right? Driver issues. You bring everything together with this pandemic and supply chain issues really stemming all the way from Asia, really globally, right? And it's a challenge like we've never seen before. But what I want to do in the next few minutes is sort of set the stage for you, what I look at for the trucking industry. I mean, my members are primarily the fleets, right? The for-hire and private fleets out there, truckload, LTL. And so I want to give you a flavor of what they're going through and what they're seeing. And that's my goal. We're going to talk about demand, supply in that regard. But first, what I want to do is, I'm an economist, so I could spend an hour talking to you about macroeconomic trends. I love it. I think it's really important. But I'm only going to spend this slide on it. But what I tell my members is I think of the macroeconomy for trucking as three big buckets of freight. It's a little simplistic to think about it like that, but I think it's effective. The first bucket you have is the consumer, and that's going to be your largest one. And then you have construction activity, and you have manufacturing activity. And at the end, those are really the bulk of freight out there. And if you look at this, this is year to date, year-over-year changes in retail sales, single-family housing starts, and even manufacturing output. And all of them are not only increasing, they're increasing nicely. And yes, we're seeing a little bit on the consumer moving away from goods back to services, which are still important for trucking, although services are less truck intensive than when we buy a good or manufacture a good or something. So we are seeing a little bit of that. Inventories at the retail level are at near historic lows. They absolutely need to be rebuilt. And so there's just a lot of freight out there from all three of these buckets. And even with the supply chain challenges that we've seen, manufacturing output, it's up 7.6%. I've got my annual forecast at 6.7%. So slowing down a little bit here in the next few months, but still really, really quite strong. So my point is, there's a lot of freight out there. So the demand side of the equation is quite good. So let's focus in on what I see in terms of demand in trucking. All right, let me explain what's going on here. On the far left-hand side, it says here, total for-hire truckload contract loads. That data actually comes from surveys my team does at ATA of our members. And it covers millions of loads, billions of dollars in revenue every single month. And it is about, if you know, it ebbs and flows, but if you look at the contract market versus the spot market, we'll call it ballpark 75% contract, 25% spot market, okay? So it's the most of it. In the middle there, you have spot market load postings, and then you have LTL tonnage. Now, LTL, if you look at just for-hire freight, truckload's about 95% of the movements, and LTL's 5%. So important, but quite small. So let's start on the left-hand side. This one confuses people because I've got 2020 down 1.2%. Year-to-date, we're down 3.9% from the same period last year, and even in August, down 4.6%. So people say, well, wait a minute, you just showed me that the three buckets of freight are good. How can this be happening? Supply, supply, supply. It's all about industry capacity. And I'm going to show you, year to date, we're down 3.9% in terms of loads in this group. Number of trucks operated is down even more. Let me give you an example. Yeah, you see the middle there, the spot market, and yes, it was down recently, but that's on really tough year-over-year comparisons, and it's up 35% this year. Let me give you a real-life example. Earlier this summer, I was at one of my carrier members had their customer advisory group in, and I was speaking to a really big, outside of your realm, right? It's a big food shipper. And this shipper told me that he tells his entire team no more than 2% of their loads on any given day should be in the spot market. So just 2% exposure to the spot market. And I said, well, what are you at now? And he said, 16%. Because he's going to his contract carriers, and they don't have the capacity to move those loads. So, so the spot market has been doing really well. So we've had sort of shift from for-hire contract over to spot market, and even into a little bit into LTL, as shippers are quite desperate to get some freight moved. At the same time, rate proxies are up and up significantly. On the for-hire contract side, in August of this year, this is revenue per mile excluding fuel surcharges, up 17.5%. We've never seen that, right? That's really, it's great. And look at the spot market's up even more, and LTL. So pricing, obviously you know this. Those of you that are buying truck transportation, you know what's going on, right? And it's tough. So in order to better explain all of that, I think we need to talk about supply. So as part of that survey I do of our members, we ask them on company tractors, how many tractors did you start the month with? How many did you buy? How many did you lease? And what did you get rid of? Same thing with leased on, not all independent contractors, but leased on independent contractors. And after growing, and on the left-hand side, it's truckload, and on the right-hand side is LTL. Again, this is primarily for contract freight. And what you see is after growing in 2019, we were down 2.4% last year. Okay, not too bad. But this year, we're down 5.5%. I will tell you that if you go back in time and you were to show me this slide, just show me this slide right here, and said, tell me what's going on with the macroeconomy, I'd say we're in a recession. Obviously, we're not. And it's simply because they cannot get enough drivers. And now, and I'll talk about the driver market in a second here, but on top of it, folks, and I bet you many of you are seeing this in your business, especially those of you that have trucks, try getting a new tractor right now. Try getting a Class 8 tractor right now. I'll give you an example. I was just talking to a member last week that said they buy 100 new tractors every year. And for whatever reason, I didn't ask why, this particular fleet was to get all of those deliveries in the second half of this year. Do you know how many they're getting by the end of the year? 0. None. It is absolutely chips. I think we've all heard about the shortage of microprocessors, but it's other things too. And in fact, I was just talking to a large OEM that said, if it wasn't for the fact that microchips were such a problem, these other shortages would be much more prevalent. Like you'd see them a lot more. And it's just that the lack of microchips is sort of masking it. It's a whole bunch of things. So now, you've got fleets. What they're doing is the used truck market is surged, right? Because you can't get trucks. So now I've got fleets telling me they can sell a 3-year-old tractor for almost as much as they bought it for new. And so you've got fleets that had tractors parked because they wanted to put, the whole, hey, let's hope we can get enough drivers to seat those trucks. Now they're selling them off because they've sort of given up on that. The other thing they're having to do on the equipment side is they're cannibalizing some of their existing trucks to keep the rest of the fleet moving because of the lack of other parts. So you add it all up, we now, unlike anything we've ever seen, and it's trailers too, by the way, so we've got an equipment issue, but then you throw it in with the truck driver shortage, and it's a recipe for disaster is what it is, right? So let's talk about the truck driver shortage here. So this is something that is not new. I tell the media this all the time. This isn't anything new in our industry. We've been dealing with a driver shortage off and on since the early 2000s. And if you go back to the early 2000s, the reasons we had a driver shortage then still hold today, right? It's demographics, high average age. The average age on the truckload side is pushing 50 years old. Private fleets are well over 50. LTLs are well over 50. You go to a truck driver training school today and look at the average age of a person getting trained, they're 35 years old. They're not coming to us, even though you can be 21 years old to drive interstate freight, they're not coming to us until they graduate high school, they don't go to the military, they don't go to college, so they go do other things, fast food, retail, something else, construction, and then they come to us when they want better pay with better benefits. So that drives up our age, which drives up retirements. Number one, 50% of all the new drivers we need to attract to this industry in the future, 50% of it, retirements of existing drivers. So the other demographic issue we have is gender. Females make up 47% of the workforce. They're only 7% of drivers. Some of my best, by the way, trucking companies love female drivers. They're safer, they're more reliable. But even my fleets that really focus in on this, they'll get maybe to 25% of their drivers are female. Still well below what females make up for the entire workforce. And then lifestyle. And I'll tell you this much, being out on the road, right? Living on the road, being away from home and so forth. I will tell you this much. I'm going to show you data in a minute. I think lifestyle is an even bigger issue than it's ever been. But now we have some other things that are exacerbating the shortage. Let me be very clear. ATA is 100% supportive of FMCSA's Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. But the fact of the matter is it's a lot more difficult to game the system now if you've tested positive as a driver. And we have almost 67,000 drivers in prohibited status. So that means, for good reason, right? But that means, so on top of all the drivers we already needed to attract to the industry, add on another 67,000. And by the way, over 50,000 of those haven't even started the return to duty process. And then the pandemic itself, right? We were able to train significantly fewer drivers last year. Social distancing, DMVs closed, or reduced hours. We know that drivers left the industry because of the pandemic. You add it all up, and we were at 61,000 drivers short before the pandemic, and we're going to put out a number here later this month. Here's a little news flash, okay? I know it's going to shock you. It's worse. But look for that report later this month. So let's go through some of the numbers in the next few minutes. And that is, here you have, and this is by far, let me be clear, this is not a clean sort of driver pay chart. But I think it's effective and it's some of the best we can get. But what this is average weekly earnings. For right off the bat, I've warned people historically to be careful with this, because what happens is average weekly earnings is your pay rate times amount worked, right? But we know that there are a whole bunch of drivers that when you increase their pay, they will work less, make the same amount, and be home more often. And I can't say I blame them, right? So I've warned people again, to be careful. So we know pay rates are going up more than the historical average and even what's going on now. The other thing is, it's not just drivers, it is production and non-supervisory occupations, but believe me, the vast majority of this is drivers. This is long distance, that's important, so non-local, general freight, truckload. And what you see is their average weekly earnings are now increasing at 5 times the historical average. It's pretty clear. Well, if it's all about pay and paying these drivers more, we should be attracting more people to this industry. We are not. The best we have done is stop the hemorrhaging. This is employment in the exact same group. Now, this next chart is why I think it's about lifestyle. This is long haul. Let me show you employment in local trucking general freight. It is up. People want to be home. They don't want to be on the road. And you know what? Even some of my members struggle getting local drivers. I'll give you an example. The other day I had a fleet tell me that they do a slip seating, so they got 2 shifts and 2 drivers will drive the same truck during the day. And they had a potential driver came in and said to the owner, all right, here's the deal. I'll drive Monday through Thursday and only on Fridays if it's raining, because otherwise I'm playing golf. And I won't work weekends. Now, this owner told me 18 months ago, I would have told this guy to go pound sand. I said, what did you do? He said, I hired him. And that also gets to the lifestyle. And that was a local job, right? At home every night. Here's the other thing. There are so many other job alternatives out there for folks. This is the courier and messenger industry. Seems weird. This is delivery of e-commerce. This is e-commerce right here, folks, delivery of e-commerce. So it is by far more than just van drivers. By the way, the other two charts are CDL holders. This is going to be more your van drivers that come up to you and throw a package on your step. They've gone from 550,000 to nearly 1 million employees. We just got this data late on Friday. It's actually up a little bit year to date now. So and by the way, here's another thing for you. These jobs, driving a van, bringing a package to you, they're not required to randomly drug test those drivers like CDL drivers over the road or local. So now think about it. A lot of states are starting to legalize marijuana. Recreational users, they're like, well, okay, maybe I can make more money over on the road, but I'm home every night. I can use marijuana on the weekends, and it's not gonna, and obviously people are taking those jobs. So this is, listen, during the Q&A, I hope I can get to some solutions, because I think there are some. I will just say there's no silver bullet for this. This is a lot of onesies and twosies that we're going to have to deal with to help solve the driver shortage. So with that, Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bob. So I have to follow that. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the how-to, some of the best practices that are out there in the industry now, and start thinking about ways you can help mitigate. Because I think setting your goal to solve these challenges, I just think is probably not the right focus. It's more about how you can make it incrementally better, how you can help get closer to where you want to be. I'll give a quick overview about C.H. Robinson, who I work for, and then we'll get into some of the solutions. So here you'll see one of the world's largest logistics providers, most connected logistics platform. So you see the different modes and services we provide. It is a truly global offering backed by best-in-class industry technology. And this here is our customer promise. And you'll hear some of this messaging kind of permeate through the best practices section. But you'll see it's 4 pillars built on the global offering, the suite of services, the technology, which if you follow us publicly, we've been very public about our investment and commitment with a $1 billion commitment over 5 years to upgrade and develop new products that we bring to life through different IQ products, Procure IQ, Market IQ, really helping customers and shippers get a better insight into how their freight dollars are being spent and what the outcomes are getting from that. And then just the last one, which, we were talking about truck driver shortages, but I think more than ever, you need people that can support these solutions, right? So I think that's where we lean in heavily with our confidence and with the best people in the industry that we can rely on to bring a lot of these solutions to life. So this is, as we get into this, it's going to be a blend of market slides. Really, you think of Bob's overview as more of that high-level, macro-level view. We're going to dive in more at the ground level and really talk about some of the specific things that are happening in industry, as well as some of the steps that you can take to help mitigate some of those challenges. We've become really popular in our space, and I think we've become really visible the last couple of years, the last 18 months for sure, simply because of all of the challenges shippers are having bringing their products to market. And right now, when we meet with people, we're getting different types of attention than we used to have from different stakeholders within companies, simply because of these challenges, because they're real, because they're lasting, and because they have an impact on our customers' customers. This presentation hopefully is going to offer you some insight into what we're seeing, some of the best practices that shippers we work with are doing to help mitigate this, as well as maybe a few takeaways that you might be able to lean into and maybe complement or augment some of the strategies you already have in place that are working, or maybe ask some different questions of your providers and partners that you work with in the space today to help you get to a better outcome. So including this, you've got You'll see some of the insights on the trucking marketplace, a little deeper dive than what Bob had showed, some supply chain influences. So what are the factors that are driving a lot of this? And then the transportation strategies that we discussed. So this is a snapshot view of all the different factors that are influencing transportation, supply, demand. And what Bob talked about was supply being the main driver, and that's true, right? And what I think is important here to consider is that when you have such a balanced market, meaning you've got such high utilization of equipment, there's not parked equipment sitting on the side of the road because there's not business for it. You're getting full utilization out of equipment and fleets. And when you have that, it means that any disruption or any slip up in the marketplace, any variable, has an exponential impact on shippers, right? And it has an exponential impact on disrupting plans and all the different strategies you have laid out. And so these are just a few of them. And I think in this industry and where a lot of you are located, weather disruptions play a huge part. And you could see the lingering effects of tropical storms, of hurricanes, and how they impact fleets, how they impact supply, how they impact shipping locations that normally might have been recovered in a couple days, now take weeks to rebalance. Because it's not only the direct impact of the market that it's hit, but it's about the triangulation of equipment that needs to move in order to be available where shippers need it, right? So it's a huge impact in a tightly balanced market, weather and disruptions. Modes of transportation up there, and you might wonder, what does that mean? Well, I guess you could almost relate that to industry as well, or to weather events as well, because if you think of some of the outsized impact of where rail gets disrupted, well, that then goes to over-the-road equipment, right? And so those shippers then have to go source that to move their product. If you think of delays at the port and being able to move containers inland, well, that's going to go then tap into the truckload market as products transloaded, and all of that puts strain on an already balanced marketplace, or already many markets at deficits. So the modes of transportation, the interdependency of these on one another helps create further disruption. And then labor, and Bob had a great overview of that, but in addition, just think of shipping locations that used to turn equipment around and unload a trailer in an hour might now take 2 to 3 hours. The compounded effect that has as it goes down the line, now that makes that truck less efficient on the next run. It potentially makes them late to their next delivery, which creates another lag effect, and it goes on and on and on. So the labor shortage not only affecting the truck drivers, but also affecting warehouse workers and service places along the way. All of those have a compounding impact in a market like today. So now that I've told you all the good news, we've got a slide up here which we've shown for a couple years, and I think this is a great way to think about the for-hire marketplace and how we view it. And if you look on the far left-hand side, you see large fleets. And the way I tell shippers today is that if you're not working with those providers today, you're not going to work with them in a marketplace like this. They're just not available for you. Unless there's a perfect marrying of your network with what their needs are, they're already spoken for. They're already probably backed up, and they can't fulfill a lot of commitments that they need to. And so you go all the way to the right, and you notice from the number of fleets, percentage of fleets, it starts to be, when you get 50 trucks or less, you're over 98% of the for-hire fleets in the marketplace. So what really this speaks to in the dry van space is there is a value for aggregators, right? There is a value for people that help you tap into that smaller fleet marketplace that's so hard to get a hold of because they have fragmented business practices, they've got fragmented needs, they move through different seasons, they're not always in the same spot all the time. So getting your arms around that pool of equipment is critical. So if you're not working with the right type of aggregators, you should be asking yourself, who should you work with in that space? And then I think what's interesting is I'm talking dry van. On the bulk side, it's a completely different view of this. I don't have the slide, but it's dominated by players in a much smaller pool of equipment. So it's less about leaning into aggregators to find you that one truck. There could be an option. It's more about tightening those relationships with your key suppliers and leveraging aggregators or intermediaries to help create additional value in the form of whether it's visibility, value for those fleets as they look for backhauls to get back to your shipping locations. So the value prop changes depending on where you sit in the space. But one of the things that we've seen as well is we see record signups with us for new carrier signups trying to get on our platform. And a lot of what that is, we theorize, is owner-operators leaving large fleets starting their own business, right? And so it's not necessarily new entrants, they're just re-entering in a different way. So you're not materially changing the pool, you're further fragmenting in many cases what an already fragmented marketplace looks like. So here's some steps. And again, these steps should have an asterisk next to them because they have to be viable for your business, right? And I think what comes out in a lot of these conversations, what I think is the most critical, which often gets undersold, is the need for interdepartment connectivity in your organizations. So these solutions done in a vacuum seldom work because you start saying, oh, well, that's great, let's spread out our shipments. Let's balance them out throughout the course of the week. Well, that doesn't work for your customers. That doesn't work for your warehouse planning. That doesn't work for such and such. So the need to come together with cross-functional teams involving stakeholders in the solutions is a critical factor for success. So spreading out shipments, if you're going to ship something that moves 1,000 miles and you're going to move it on Thursday, you might want to move it on Friday because the driver's just going to sit over the weekend and either you're going to pay for that in the form of a premium or you're going to get that load turned down. And they're just going to find something else that keeps them moving. Because right now, the enemy of efficiency is, or the enabler to efficiency is sitting around. So drivers don't want to sit around. There's just too many options out there for them. So being able to balance your freight out throughout the week is a best practice. Transit times. So look to optimize your network as best as possible, especially whether you're running your own private fleet or you're running short haul business. Look to optimize to get as many turns out of that equipment as you can in a day. Try to work where you can get some of your short haul freight shipped out early in the morning so those drivers could potentially return for an afternoon reload and then deliver the following morning, and start to look at how you are smarter about where and when you ship. Secondary lanes, this is an interesting part that's come up, and Bob showed the graph of spot market freight. So secondary lanes in a market like today are pretty much spot market freight. And you see a lot of shippers include these in RFPs, and they're usually the first lanes to fail, meaning they're the ones that get turned down with the highest level of frequency. Why? Because they're really difficult to plan for, and you don't always know when they're going to move. It's a lot easier to build your network around stuff that moves every day. When you start seeing that once a week, once every month type lane, putting a price on that through a procurement exercise generally does one of two things. You either are priced too high because somebody has to build in the risk to be able to cover that, or you're priced too low and they're going to refuse it when you need them to move it and the market's not in your favor. So what do? Find a solution where you can aggregate and take to market your secondary lanes in a big pool, right? And you can go to market with those in aggregate, so it becomes a bigger chunk of something to work for, and you can look to not only get pricing that allows the freight to move, but also commitment to capacity at that time. Preparing for unplanned lanes, again, this goes to the type of partnerships you have and who you're leveraging, so make sure you're working with people that have the ability to flex up with you. I think that's where a lot of constraints have come into place now, is something new comes up. Supplier shifts because you couldn't get product out of one spot, you had to move it to another spot. So how do you prepare for that? How are you thinking about that? How are you leveraging or optimizing your portfolio of people to work with? That's a big piece. And then the last part, prioritize loads to avoid capacity problems. I think this is, as you're thinking about procuring capacity, making sure that you're aligning the right type of relationships and service providers with the right type of freight. So your largest customers should get your most valuable customers should get your most regular, most committed, most integrated capacity partnerships, and then so on down the line. And I think just in general, details matter, right? So I know this, in this space, everybody has sometimes regulated freight, hazardous freight, so the details definitely matter there, and it's part of your business process. But even when you get outside of the specialized freight, details matter when it comes to weight, when it comes to loading times, when it comes to availability, whatever those details are. Work to connect real information to the providers you're working with to avoid any of the gaps that would enable somebody to not be able to accept your freight and move it. And this here is how we position holistically transportation excellence. So this kind of brings it all back together. I mentioned earlier the interdepartment connectivity. You cannot be successful without all of these working together, without all these factors coming together into a holistic view and definition of success. So your carrier strategy, how you go to market, how strategic are you going to market? When you run procurement events, are you running the right type of procurement events? Are you bringing the right freight to market through a procurement event? And are you bringing the rest of that through a different spot market or kind of pooled secondary lane strategy? Execution strategy. So do you have defined quality metrics? Are you meeting regularly with your providers to make sure that those quality metrics are being held up? Are you adapting those quality metrics as markets evolve and change, right? So 98% on time might have been something that really mattered before, but when you can't get a piece of equipment, are you making the right decisions to keep the freight moving? And you're working through that. So I mentioned the supply chain continuation, so the cross-functional alignment. How regularly are you engaging other stakeholders in these conversations? Are they involved in the procurement planning exercises? Are they giving their voice to the solutions that you ultimately bring to bear? I think I can't say it enough, that's such a critical part to being successful. And then technology, as I mentioned earlier, technology continues to be less and less of a nice to have and more table stakes. So how are you utilizing technology, whether it's visibility, whether it's route planning, whether it's track trace, whether it's how you communicate internally to a broad pool of stakeholders? How are you leveraging technology and how are you helping providers integrate seamlessly with you, whether it's into your store-bought ERP, TMS, or through some third party that you purchase that through? So critical factors, being able to bring visibility, and I think that technology piece acts really as the umbrella over all that. It's allowing all of these different functions to work more efficiently and effectively. And that's all I have today.
On the table. Great, thank you, Jim. Bob, appreciate your insights. I have a couple questions for them myself, and then we will be opening up the floor to your questions and comments, your insights. I would ask that you raise your hand first so that one of our mic runners can come to you. This is because we are recording this session so that we can offer it available for our members later, and we want to be able to hear you. So first of all, Bob, we've seen pay increases. It's not really alleviating the situation with the truck driver shortage. You pointed to lifestyle being a big factor, and the fact that it's the long haul routes where we're really seeing this shortage. What do you think it's going to take to lure new drivers in?
Yeah, so that's sort of the million-dollar question, and here's the thing. There's no one reason for a driver shortage. I went through all of that with you, right? So there's no one solution. I will tell you this, as an economist, anytime you have a situation where demand outstrips supply, what happens to price? It goes up. We all know that. Same thing in the driver market, absolutely. But now we need to also look at some maybe public policy issues to go around that. For example, I told you earlier that the average age of a person getting, the average age of a driver is pushing 50 years old. It's over 50 in some segments. If you look at the people being trained today as truck drivers, they're 35 years old. Yet, to the lifestyle point, that's probably not when you want to be on the road when you're 35, right? That's probably when you have some kids at home and you want to be home more often and see the soccer games and so forth. So one of the things that ATA is proposing, and by the way, it's in a form is in the infrastructure package, not the reconciliation, right, but the infrastructure package, bipartisan infrastructure funding, is one of the things we want to do is, and we really look, to be honest with you, we look to the military for this. And we're like, why in the military can you have an 18, 19, or 20-year-old driving tanks, flying planes, right? Why? Because they're highly trained. So why can't we bring that concept to trucking and lower the age, interstate driving requirement age from 21 to 18 with, by the way, here's what we're proposing, like 400 additional hours of training. So we're not just proposing to throw them out there. A lot more safety technology on the truck. And then have them even be more of an apprenticeship type of program where they go out with another driver for a longer period of time. And if you add all those up, can we, in a safe way, because this is at the end, it has to be done in a safe manner, can we then get not all, but some 18, 19, and 20-year-olds out there driving a truck? We think you can under those circumstances. And it was called the Drive Safe Act. And it was actually one of the few things that had bipartisan support in Congress. It sort of morphed, and in the bipartisan infrastructure funding package, by the way, if we get it, that increases spending on roads and bridges by 38% over 10 years. I mean, it's great. Unfortunately, it's been tied to this reconciliation package, and so that's the problem. But anyways, in that, the Drive Safe Act went to a pilot program of 3,000 drivers, 18 to 21 at any given time. But here's the thing. It's the first step to maybe seeing, A, if it works, and we can do it in a safe manner, and then expand it beyond that. And by the way, if you get somebody who's 20, and when they turn 21 and they go and they're eligible to then leave that program, you can backfill it, so that it's a rolling 3,000. Now, I'll be very honest with you folks. Just lowering the age alone will not solve this problem. But it's one thing that we have to look at, we believe, in order to at least make a dent in it. Because at this juncture, the only way this gets better in the short run is for the economy to slow down. Absent that, it's not going to get better. And I don't think, looking out on the horizon, we don't see a recession for a little while. Now, I will say, as an economist, there's a lot more unknowns out there than we've seen in a long time. But right now, it's looking good. So the point is, there's no one solution. There's going to be, my members will tell you, if they can get a driver home every night or every other night, you can actually pay those drivers less, and they jump on those jobs. But that's easier said than done. So anyways, there's a lot of things we have to look at as an industry, both internally as well as in a public policy arena.
So Jim, I know Bob says he doesn't think anything's going to get better in the short term, but our members are certainly searching for some solutions, or at least things to make it a little better in the short term. Should they be looking at some alternatives to trucking routes, to these long-haul trucking routes where that might be possible? Are there any other creative solutions to help out in the short term?
Yeah, I think you always should be looking at alternatives to what you're doing today to find something that's more optimal. The challenge is that those markets are pretty constrained as well today too. So I think, but it's still, what you should be looking at is if you're looking at long haul freight and intermodal is an option for you and there's capacity to do it and you've shied away from it because maybe it didn't align to a transit time expectation, you may want to lean into that a little more heavily nowadays, simply because the assurance you'll have the freight moving. I think as well, anything you can do by working with your partners to create more opportunities, whether that's spreading out the shipments, whether that's moving from one mode to the other. I think all of those options should be on the table right now, especially if you're in periods of surge where you have a lot of demand for your product and you've got to get it out.
Jim, can I just, related to that, I'd be curious if you're seeing this, but I think consumers are so worried. When you got 70 ships docked outside of Southern California, consumers are so worried about getting the goods they want for the holidays that they're buying them now.
Yeah.
And I guess in one sense that's good because it should spread out the fall freight season a little bit. But I think for folks like this, then that means there's a lot more retail freight in periods when there wouldn't traditionally be. Are you seeing that in your network?
Yeah, very much so. We have seen an evolution from a peak season to it always kind of feeling like peak season, right? So yeah, that's had a huge impact, and I think right now we've seen it speed up earlier in the traditional peak season than it ever has before, especially out of those affected markets, where it becomes, you could just look at load to truck ratios that are published, and the spikes in load to truck ratios, the volatility there has just been huge.
Great. Do we have any questions from the audience at this point? I think I see Jim Carroll here. Sorry, Jim, the microphone's coming for you.
I have a two-part question. First part of it is, do you see impacts from electronic data logging? That was a new initiative a couple of years ago by the Department of Transportation. Is that affecting this? And if so, is there a safe regulatory relief that you would like to see that could potentially help ease some of the restrictions on the drivers? And you might want to expound on what electronic data logging is.
Yep.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. We went from a paper log system, right? And I think we were essentially the only industrialized economy in the world where drivers got to use a paper log, to an electronic logging system, where either outright cheating is difficult or flexibility is more difficult. So for example, I give an example of, if you were a driver and you started your day and you pulled onto the highway and it was bumper to bumper and you're like, forget this, I'm going to pull off at the next and just wait until this eases up a bit. Under paper logs, you could probably not have started your day when you did, and you can start it later. Under electronic logging device, that flexibility is gone. You started your day. And so do we think it took some capacity out of the system? Yes, we did, right? How much exactly is hard to say, but it certainly did. But I'll be honest with you, we're not going to get any relief in this area, nor is ATA completely honest, or nor are we asking for it. Our members, even in times of crisis, for example, there's been people saying we need relief on hours of service generally right now to clear out some of the backlogs out there. And I say, folks, my members tell their drivers every day to adhere to the hours of service regulations, that they're there for a reason. They are safe. Okay? They make you safer. And now you want us to just say, forget them? You know what? The only time we will do that is in times of life or death, right? When you have to get product in for life and death situations. Other than that, we don't push for it, and nor do I think the federal government has a stomach to do those sorts of things. I mean, I'm getting ready to get on an airplane. These flights are packed. There are delays now on some airlines. We don't want those folks saying to pilots, no, don't worry about the hours of service. Keep flying, right? I mean, so it's a good question, and one I get often. Electronic logging devices did take some capacity out of the system, but what I would argue is for the right reasons. And so now cheating is more difficult. We have to look at this as a holistic, right? Again, there's no one solution to these capacity crunches. We got to figure out how to attract more people to this industry, right? And of course now it's worse because of the equipment situation as well.
Yeah, I think if anything, what ELDs have done is they've highlighted waste. And so as you think about that example, the shipper that used to take 2 to 3 hours to load now becomes a very undesirable shipper. And in a marketplace where drivers and carriers have a lot of options and choices, guess what? Sitting at a place 3 hours that now cuts out drive time falls really low on the priority list of where to pick up, right? And so shippers are constantly carriers are constantly evaluating and optimizing their networks as well. So you want to make sure that with this heightened level of visibility and exposure, that you're doing everything you can to remove waste in the loading and unloading process.
Thank you, Jim, because I tell shippers this all the time. To your point, if you turn the drivers around sooner, and everybody did that, you would increase effective capacity in the network without adding one truck to the road. And electronic logging devices have been able to now, you can see it. And so I think it is, in that regard, it's helping.
Right.
That's a good point.
Do we have another question?
Had a question concerning California. California appears to be heading like a closed state. They have legislation coming up that will force the lawn mowing companies to go to green, has to be battery powered or electric. We have freight that goes into California, and we have a hard time finding drivers that want to go to California. They don't want to have to pay for the high fuel prices to get out of California, and they don't want to have to take a southern route because if they break down in the middle of the night on the highway, they're fearful of their lives because of all the immigrants that might be trying to cause harm to them. Do you see any relief on trying to get freight into California?
We politely call it the People's Republic of California. No, I'm just kidding. Another one to add on to that. So I don't, there's not a lot that can be done outside of the folks in California, right? I mean, ATA, if you look, ATA and the California Trucking Association has sued the state more times and tried to get some of the stuff. The other thing that's hurting, and it really goes back to the data that both I showed you as well as Jim showed you, when you have, I do believe that there are drivers leaving leased on independent contractors are leaving fleets and going to the spot market and becoming, they're on their own and not getting freight from a fleet for a few reasons. One is spot market rates have surged more than even contract, right? But also, do you know, many of my members are going to their leased on independent contractors and saying, Bob, we love you as a driver, you're a great driver, but we run in California. And we're scared to death of a class action suit against us with our independent contractors, so we'd like to make you an employee. How many industries are going to independent contractors and saying, we want to make you an employee? That's exactly what a lot of these trucking companies are doing because of this risk in a couple states. The leader of that is California. And sometimes the drivers do it, but other times they're like, no, I like being an independent contractor. So what they do, to the data you showed, they're going and getting their own authority.
Yep.
And they're going to the spot market, or they're going through brokerage divisions at fleets, and there's a whole host of places they can go. But in terms of relief, I'll be honest with you, I don't at this juncture, I don't think there's going to be a lot in California.
Yes, this is a question I think for both Bob and Jim to respond to. Jim, you mentioned the intermodal as a possible option, and thinking about again Southern California, People's Republic of California, coming from those 70 ships out in the harbor when they do get unloaded, how can we get the freight more effectively from Southern California to the Midwest or even the East Coast? In a couple of my other businesses, I'm pretty close to the railroad side of things, and I would think that, or one would think, I'll take myself out of the equation, that if the railroad businesses, the Class 1s, were more, not as sadly constrained as they seem to be right now, that would be an ally that would help solve or relieve some of the stress on the trucking side. But I don't know if Mike's in the audience or not here, but one of our friends from Dodge Oil in Southern California, Mike Pierce, said when they were coming out here on Saturday, there were like 15 trains, BNSF trains, parked waiting for crews. On the railroad side, they've got the same issues. Can't get young conductors to sign up. Why? Because they're away from home 3-4 times a week sometimes. And so attracting people to the railroad industry has become almost as difficult as attracting people to the trucking industry. Further, the Class 1 railroads have gone to a model of business called precision scheduled railroading, which is neither precision and it isn't even scheduled these days. It just waits for more tonnage, and trains are delayed, and therefore customers get less service instead of more service. And so the question is, with that background as a beginning, is to both Jim and Bob, do you see the railroad situation as helping or hindering the trucking shortage that we're all experiencing right now?
I'll start and follow up. I think, I don't know if I'd answer either helping or hindering. I think it's a good question. I think you see, as we talked about some of the disruptive factors with modes, where there are inefficiencies in a mode of transportation, demand increases for anything else that can help offset that. So if you've got an inefficiency in outbound Southern California, for example, in getting containers loaded, getting trains moving, product still has to move. So shippers are left with no other option than to find over-the-road equipment, right, or find another way to get their product moved, thus adding more demand to an already constrained marketplace. So I think it speaks to that general theme where there are inefficiencies or where there's gridlock has an exponential impact. And so when the question was asked, what can you do differently, I kind of hesitated because I don't know if, Bob said there's no silver bullet. It's not meant to be a silver bullet other than to say, make sure you're just exploring your options, because there still are ways that you can optimize from to one mode to the other. It's just not always a surefire solution for a whole host of reasons.
To your point, and all I'll say on this is, trucks and trains are really more complements than substitutes. Less than 10% of all truck and train freight is competitive between the two modes. When you look at, length of haul, time definiteness of the freight, and so forth, now in that less than 10%, it's pretty competitive, right? Trucks are 72% of all the freight tonnage, but in that less than 10%, it's almost a 50-50 split. But it's a small amount compared to the rest.
I can hear you. There you go.
Okay, there we go. So I know this isn't really a short-term potential solution, but I want to ask, what advances have been made in the driverless truck technology, and do you see that as a feasible potential solution more in the long term, I guess, than the short term?
So there's some remarkable stuff going on in that, and even in this city right here with a couple of companies. So I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to have an option on a truck that when the driver gets on the highway, that he or she will be able to push sort of an autopilot button, and they'll be hands off, feet off. But that is what we call driver assist technologies. It is not driver replace. And what I tell my fleets is, any of you that are sitting around waiting for autonomous vehicles to solve your problems with the driver, you're going to be out of business. Because you will still have to have, a lot of us have cars that are somewhat autonomous, right? My car is, but if the lanes are all of a sudden gone, the cameras miss it, you got to be able to take over, right? And so this stuff, until we get all the vehicles talking to each other and all the vehicles talking to the infrastructure, we can't even invest enough in infrastructure now. So yes, is it moving along? It is. But I think it's really going to be, can this technology make it more attractive to be a truck driver if you're not constantly actually having to drive? If you're just monitoring, I don't know the answer to that. Maybe for some it'll be more attractive. I know it would be for me, but maybe for others it's less attractive. But I don't think, you are not going to take the driver out of the seat for a very, very long time at this point.
All right, I think we're about at the end of our time. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Jim. This has been a really great discussion. Thank you all.